from Isaka, Istanbul. Today, this evening, we have a special guest from London, Cemal Ahmet, well known as King of Data Protection. And to this evening, he will explain a hot topic on data protection, cookies, and how to manage their privacy for our enterprises. And also, Yağmur, one of our colleagues and ambassador of Isaka İstanbul in London, will be with us too. First, I should remind that we are recording this event and we will publish this in our YouTube channel. Now, Yağmur, can you introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you for the brief introduction, Gökhan. So I'm a Turkish qualified lawyer, and I have been working as data protection and privacy consultant for nearly 3 years now. I have law bachelor, and I studied 2 masters, one in cybersecurity and the other one is information security engineering. I started my career in 2018 as a junior consultant in a law firm in Ankara. I was working on cyber crimes back then and drafting policies and agreements on protection, privacy, and cybersecurity. Then I decided to work for myself and I set up a law firm in Istanbul, Turkey. And I worked mainly with startups, designed compliance projects, and I advised clients on privacy and data protection laws, including KVKK, which is Turkish Privacy Act, and GDPR, General Data Protection Law. I am currently working in London. I'm based in London and working with KZN privacy experts. Actually, Cemal, who is going to be our guest today, is my boss, but I am here with my Isaka hat today as a host. So I am working in KZN privacy experts for 7 months now, and we advise companies on data security and privacy matters. We have outsourced DPO protection officer services and GDPR representation services. I mainly work on the consultancy side. I am also participating some of the organization of events and also building privacy awareness in the business growth side to encourage companies to adopt honest privacy practices. So we do many things in KZN privacy experts, but as I said, I'm here with my Isaka hat. So I just want to say why working with Isaka, volunteering to Isaka make me so excited because Isaka is also empowering IT professionals to help advance digital trust so businesses can thrive. And this is what we exactly want to do and aim to do in KZN privacy experts. With that being said, I'm not sure if I should introduce Cemal, but since we are working together, I want to pass the work to him so he can introduce himself if it's convenient for him as well.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to most of you who are joining from Istanbul. I can see there's a few familiar names here, so I'm really happy to see familiar faces. And to the new friends that I'm about to make friends with and meet, I want to say thank you to all of you to coming to listen to us and to Isaka Istanbul. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come here to share a few words on cookies compliance. You know, I have a lot of love for Turkey. I think it's probably the single country that I've visited more than any other countries, including my homeland, by the way. And the last time I was in Turkey, I was actually in Istanbul, and I remember waking up very early in the morning to go and see the Blue Mosque for the few days that I was there and making sure I go up there for Fajr. So to all of you joining, salam, marhaba, and assalamu alaikum.
Merhaba.
Merhaba and alaikum salam. Thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself, Jamal?
I think Gokul did such a great job of introducing me. There isn't much left to say. But for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Jamal Ahmed, and I've been in data privacy for a number of years now. And the thing that fascinates me most about data privacy is when you first speak to people and they think, oh, yeah, look, you know what, it doesn't actually bother me. But then when you start explaining, so you're happy for the government to look at your messages, and you're happy for somebody to see the emails that you're receiving, and you're happy for someone to listen to your phone, they're like, oh, okay, hang on a minute. Actually, I'm not happy with that at all. I'm like, oh, okay. I also noticed that you have curtains in your house. You don't really want people to see what you're doing all the time, do you? They're like, no. So when you talk about privacy, people actually forget about the different types of privacy. So yes, we have privacy over our bodies, so bodily privacy. We have privacy over our territory, somebody coming into your space, into your house, into your room, into your land, into your car. Then we have communications privacy. So that's privacy over your actual messages that you're sending, privacy over the phone calls that you're having, privacy over any of your communications. And then you have information privacy. So that's privacy over the kind of information that people have. And when you think about privacy, there's so much to it. And more, people are becoming more and more aware, and people are valuing their privacy all over the world, to the point now where we see billion-dollar companies, they've stopped telling you about their features. They've stopped telling you about how competitively they're priced. They've stopped telling you about anything to do with their product. And all they're telling you now is how much they care about their privacy. And I don't know what the adverts are like in Istanbul, but here, when I go out and look at the bus stop, there's a massive advert for the iPhone 13 Pro Max. And they're saying privacy as the headline to sell that product to us. So what we can see is this shift towards privacy. And the interesting thing is, in Europe, we are seen as the leaders when it comes to privacy, right? We have the European Convention on Human Rights, we have the Charter, and we brought in the GDPR in 2016. But actually, what's really interesting is when I was doing my research into this, I went back 1400 years into the desert where our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. And if you look at the lessons from privacy from those early ages, it's fascinating. And especially when you look at the Ottoman Empire and how they treated privacy. Did you know that they had two different knockers, one knocker for men and one knocker for women, so that you wouldn't violate people's privacy? And when the leaders, or when the Ottoman Empire, when they used to go knock on people's doors, they used to actually knock and stand to the side. So when the door opened, they wouldn't peer in and invade someone's privacy like that. So when you look at privacy from a philosophical point of view, from a religious point of view, even from just a humanitarian point of view, you can see there's so many layers and it embeds so much into our lives. And I'm on a mission, to empower every single organization on earth to adopt honest privacy practices so that we can safeguard the freedoms, those basic fundamental freedoms of every woman, every child, and every man on this planet. And that's why I set up Kasian Privacy Experts. I was like, you know what? I'm going to go and do this, and I'm going to do a mission. But very quickly, we realized, regardless of how big the companies we work with, regardless of how many billions of customers they have, and regardless of that, it's just a drop in the ocean. There is no way in my lifetime I'm going to be able to achieve that dream on my own. And that's why we set up the Privacy Pros Academy. And at the Privacy Pros Academy, we're building a community of high-performing professionals, and we're all coming together to empower those businesses, those organizations, those clients that we have to adopt honest privacy practices. So now together, we can really fulfill our mission and our vision and our purpose of making sure that every woman, every man, and every child on this planet has the freedom over their personal information. And as a result of that drive and some of the great work that we've been able to do, you've seen me get recognized by various media to the point where the BBC has dubbed me the king of data protection. And we get leading companies, Facebook, UBS, Vodafone, large companies all over the world, asking us to come and train their staff, on how to manage privacy programs. So what they ask for is, can you come and empower our staff, and can you put them through the actual training for the IAPP certifications that usually involves the CIPPE, which is a Certified Information Privacy Professional of Europe. Then you have the CIPM. And I know the ISACA also has some great programs when it comes to all things data privacy as well. And especially across the states, if you're looking to really get involved in data privacy, then ISACA are the certifications that they really want. And increasingly, my colleagues in the Middle East are saying the ISACA certifications hold a lot of weight there as well. So if you are looking to delve deeper into privacy, then make sure you balance all of your certifications. Yes, the IAPP is the gold standard, but to give you that competitive edge, because every single person seems to be wanting to go for that now, make sure you complement that with the ISACA certifications as well. And before I get off track, I was talking about Yemuri, just stop me here. And if you have any specific questions that you'd like to ask me about my background, please go for it. The only other thing I want to say is, as part of the Privacy Pros Academy, one of the things we realized was there's not enough information and help out there for people to really make a successful data privacy career. So we set up the Privacy Pros podcast, and thanks to God, it's been ranked as the #1 data privacy podcast globally. And I go and interview the people who have got where I want to get to. So the leaders in the world of privacy, people who really know stuff, and the people who inspire me, and hopefully will inspire all of you to really understand how you can make it to the top. So if you are interested in having a thriving career, then make sure you tune into our podcast, and also you can tune into the YouTube version, because I know a lot of people are visual learners. So we've set up a YouTube channel, which actually Yamura was very instrumental in pushing it for the people who don't actually like to listen to podcasts and prefer YouTube videos as well. Plug yourself into those. And if you want additional resources, so we give out a lot of free resources all the time to our email subscribers. So feel free to subscribe and get in touch. And if you don't want to do any of those things, then feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. We're always giving out resources, and we're always sharing useful information, and we're always promoting webinars like this. So please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn as well. Yamur, over to you.
Thank you. It was so inspiring to hear what drives you and what motivates you. Although I know very well that you want to build a global community and empower organizations to adopt honest privacy practices. This is what we focus on every action we do. So I kind of forgot to mention our training service. So it was good for you to mention this academy, which is a big part of our company. So we are not only consultants giving consultancy service, but we are also official IAPP partners, and we are giving IAPP certification trainings, as well as Jamal has and separate training. He takes people, and it's like apprenticeship, something like this. Like he takes people from different backgrounds, different working backgrounds, and teach them how to, if they are passionate about data protection, and if they come with the right goals, so they work with them, and he mentors them, so they can become privacy professionals. So when I first get into company, he explained our values to me, which they are still resonates with me. We are building on our excellence, building on integrity, honesty, and strength. And our value is challenge. So we challenge ourselves, but this challenge is built on fun, optimism, and determination. And we are constantly trying to grow in a confident, empowering way. And yeah, so thank you for this introduction. And I want to ask you if you want to add something else about the academy. I know we have podcast now, and I know we have an amazing trailer we recently uploaded to our channel. If you want to show it, feel free to show, and then we can go to cookies questions, which everybody is excitedly waiting.
Yeah, why don't we jump straight into the cookies, which is what everybody's here for, and then towards the end, if there's time, we can plug in some of those excellent resources that we have available for everyone. But I think you've done a really good job of introducing my background, what we do, and the companies, and especially the values. And these three values are the core of everything that you see and everything that we do, is the value of excellence, like making sure that everything we do is done to a really good standard, and it goes above and beyond what you would see as good enough, right? It has to go beyond good enough. It has to be excellent. And then we have growth, right? It's always important to grow, because if you're standing still, people are growing, then you're getting left behind. So it's important to be at the forefront and always be growing. And of course, there's no point doing all of those things unless we're feeling challenged and we're having a lot of fun at the same time. So thank you for reminding me of our values and for sharing it with all of the great people on this event today. And you know what, I just want to say, it's about 6 o'clock here in the UK, and I know it's a little bit later for you guys in the evening, but this turnout for an event, it's one of the best turnouts I've seen on a webinar. So I just want to give everybody a round of applause for really turning up, and I just want to say, you know what? That's the first step towards success, is actually turning up and being there. And the fact that all of you are here at this time, it makes me really happy. And I'm going to be a little bit cheeky, right? And for those of you that have actually come and trained with me, I can see some of the people in my academy here, is I'm going to ask you to turn your cameras on, because I prefer to speak with people that I can see, and actually I can actually engage with you guys a little bit better as well. So please, if you are comfortable, and you should all be, go ahead and turn your cameras on, and let's make this the most interactive, the most fun, and the most valuable webinar you've been to all month.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Okay, Hayrican with us. He's the lead of ISECA Istanbul chapter. And who else? Cam restrictions on. Somebody says there's a restriction, Hayrican. It is.
We work on taking those restrictions off, and for those guys that are part of the academy, let's lead the way.
It's okay now.
Okay.
All right. There we go. Nice to see familiar faces.
Wolfgang, hello.
And let's see some new faces as well.
Hello, Ashutosh.
Ashutosh, Wolfgang, Mohammed, I'm proud of you guys. You're leading the way. See, this is what happens when you join the academy. You find the confidence, you inspire, and you do something different, right? Here's one thing I want to get everyone to commit to today, right? One of the things that we teach at the academy is DSD. Like, you have to do something different, because if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same results, right? That is the definition of insanity. And one thing I want to teach you guys, and I know this isn't about academy, but here's some free valuable lessons for you guys, right? One of the things my mentors taught me is, he said, Jamal, your best thinking has got you to where you are now, but you're telling me you want to go and achieve all of these things. If you want to achieve all of these things, your best thinking is not going to help you to achieve that. So you have to do something differently. What is that you're going to do differently? So what I'm going to ask you guys is take small steps. Start with one thing at a time, and if that means doing something different, is actually showing people who you are and showing up and just being fully present, then go ahead and do that. The other thing I would encourage all of you to do is put away your distractions, right? So everyone's here because you want to learn about cookies, or you want to get some more fascinating insights, potentially to help you with your career. For some of you, actually to get into this. And we know cookies is the hottest topic for businesses right now. So when you go to an interview, or when you're having a conversation with your peers, if you can show them that you grasp this really technical, challenging area, then there is no one else that's going to stand ahead of you when it comes to showing competence. And at the Privacy Pros Academy, we're built on a C5 formula. And this is a proven formula to get anyone from where they are to a successful career as a world-class privacy pros. And that C5 is built on 5 C's. The first C is clarity. When you have clarity, you're able to explain things in a way that anyone can understand. And I'll show you guys a secret. There is nothing special about anything I have to say or do. In fact, I'm not even a trained lawyer, right? Why is it that I get invited to these webinars, to these podcasts? Why is it that the BBC invites me to speak on TV and radio? It's because I have clarity in my understanding, which means I can say things in a language that everyone understands without going to technical and legal jargon. So that's the first thing, clarity. The second thing we teach at the academy is confidence. Now, when you're clear on something, it helps you to have the confidence. And when you have clarity and confidence, it gives you competence, right? You're clear, you're confident, now you're competent because you understand what you need to do. You understand how to pragmatically apply the theory in a practical way because you're a world-class professional. So when you have clarity, confidence, and competence, that gives you credibility to every single person you come across, everyone you write to, and everyone who ever listens to anything you do. And the final thing you need is a supportive community to build that around, to double check when you're stuck, when you're confused, bounce your ideas around, and actually to hold you to that level of excellence. And that's why the C5 formula that we have at the Privacy Pros Academy really helps everyone to be their best. And I'd like to encourage every single one of you, whether you join the academy or not, whether you ever come across us again or not, to adopt those 5 things and see where that takes you in your professional careers. Yamur, with that said, shall we jump straight into cookies?
Sure. So what are those cookies? And are we talking about real cookies, or if it's about data privacy, how?
And I have another question. If Jamal
Go on.
give us some information about the nature of cookies, because there is a definition for cookies, but this definition never defined the reality of the cookies, which collect lots of information, especially privacy, the information who determines the personal data, you know. Can you explain the differences of different kind of cookies?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the good thing is we've got a long time. I think we've got another 90 minutes. Do we have another 90 minutes or so, or an hour? I think we have an hour, so we can really take a deep dive into cookies and really break that stuff down. So first of all, what are cookies and how do they work? So cookies are small text files that's used by websites to store information. And these cookies get passed between the server of the website and the user's web browsers. So when you visit a site, it will send the cookie from its server to the browser you are using, and then that browser stores a text file on your device, and that is what we call the cookie file. And these cookies contain strings of characters that's sent to your computer or your device when you visit the website. They allow the website to remember your actions, remember your preferences, such as your login language, the font size, and other preferences. And sometimes they make the website work more efficiently. Other cookies, such as Google Analytics, are used to collect analytical information. And they have a number of uses, and I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list here because they're being used for innovative uses all the time. But some of the most common things that you'll come across is saving user login information to remember them on their future visits, improving the user experience, identifying the user and what exactly they're doing, remembering the preferences. So did they have particularly, does this user prefer a dark mode or a light mode? What is the font size they remember? Do they have a specific requirement for accessibility purposes? Understanding how the user is interacting with the website. So all of these heat maps and things that you might come across when you go into marketing. Improving the user experience by storing information about your cart, so the users don't have to enter it on every single page they visit. Right? So imagine you're going shopping and you're buying an outfit. Every time you go to a new page, you don't want to lose what's in your shopping cart. You want to make sure that stays there because you decided you want to buy that. It also helps to gather statistics about the visitors, such as where they are located, what kind of devices they're using to access your website. And they can also help to gather analytical information about page views, how many pages has somebody viewed when they attended, how long somebody has spent on your website, session durations, and the bounce rate as well. Have people come to your website, looked at something and gone away? Because all of this information help businesses to make decisions to improve the chances of somebody coming to your website, spending more time there, interacting, engaging, and actually potentially spending more money or giving you more information, so then you can use them for your business purposes. So that's basically what cookies are. Now, the next question we had was, how do cookies invade your privacy? And in terms of what cookies are, it's actually important to note that you can separate them into 3 types of categories, and we'll come into talk more about this. But for now, what I'd like you to know is that there are some cookies that we call functional cookies. And that means these cookies need to be dropped on your device or placed on your device for the website to actually work. And without these cookies, you wouldn't be able to use the website. So they're functional cookies. Sometimes you might see people referring to them as strictly necessary cookies. The next set of cookies, the next bucket we have is those that are actually analytical cookies. And these are kind of there to help the website user and the website developer, sorry, not the website owner, the website owner and the website developers to understand how people are using their websites. So it measures where you've come from, where you're going, how long you're spending on each page, is there anything specific you're looking at, why did you leave the website? And then the third kind of cookies, and these are the ones that legally are causing the biggest challenges, is your marketing cookies, your targeting cookies. And these cookies have one specific purpose, is to try and target you for advertising purposes, for marketing purposes. And that's the kind of cookies that most businesses are having a challenge with at the moment. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But before I get into that, Gökhan asked a very good question. How do cookies invade privacy? Based on what I've said so far, it seems like, they're actually very useful. It's going to remember my language. It's going to remember who I am. It's going to remember the mode I want in. It's going to share with the website owner how long I've spent on each page. And all of that information is probably actually quite useful because next time I come back, there might be a better user experience. So yes, cookies are very useful and they do improve the browsing experience. The problem is they can also be used for intrusive activities by advertisers. They can track where you're shopping, what you're buying. They can track which websites you're visiting, how long you're spending on those websites. They can see what other things you're looking at and start really building a profile. And this lets those advertisers gather information about you. So the intention is they want to understand you so they can show you ads based on your interest. Now, if you've ever noticed that the same ads keep reappearing, even though you're moving from one website to another, you're looking at one newsletter to another, it's because the advertiser is using these cookie IDs to track the users, and they're building up a detailed profile of users' online habits. This is the problem, because this can be harmful to the user because it means companies know a lot of information about the users without even ever having to ask you. Let's take an example of a case that we saw. So there's this app called, actually, let's not name the app, but let's say there's an app and let's say it's specifically used by women and it's used to track their menstrual cycle over time. Now, when you use this app, it's really there for you for whatever it is. You don't realize that there's cookies there, and that cookies is sending information about everything else you're doing with your phone. And you don't actually realize that this app is monitoring where your hormones are likely to be at what part of the calendar, so they know when they should be offering you chocolates, for example, right? This is not information that you sign up to when you sign up to use such an app. When you download Muslim Pro, to know what time to pray or to visit the Blue Mosque, for example, right, for 5 times a day, you don't expect them to send your location data to the US Army. So these are the kind of challenges that we see with the apps. And in really extreme cases, we've seen a company has taken that data from a cookie of a young girl who got herself pregnant, and they sent a welcome pack congratulating her on her pregnancy to her family home. And the parents found out about her pregnancy, not from the girl, but from the company who had actually used the cookies data to assess that this person was actually pregnant. Then you have other companies who will look at somebody's habits and preferences and determine certain things. So for example, if someone's looking at gluten-free recipes, they might deduce from other things they've noticed that this person is potentially diabetic, and they start marketing them with diabetic products. Other people might see that this person is looking at particularly miserable stuff, and this person might actually be suffering from mental health, and then they might think that's a really good opportunity for them to go and manipulate somebody, right? So it can be used for lots of horrible situations, and I'm just giving you a couple of examples that I've come across in my experience. But if you actually go and look at this, you can see that cookies can really violate your privacy. But just think about this. I want you to think about the last 24 hours. And if you think about your activity over the last 24 hours, how much can I learn about you? What websites have you visited in the last 24 hours? What kind of articles have you been reading? How much time have you spent speaking to certain individuals, right? So let's say if you're using, for example, something like WhatsApp, one of the things that we saw with WhatsApp is they wanted to use the information from the cookies to understand how much time you're spending talking to certain people, and then combine that information with what they collect on Facebook to give you even more targeting. And that's why last year we saw the biggest migration digitally ever in the history of mankind, from people moving from WhatsApp all the way to Signal. It's because people were not willing to give up their privacy rights. People were not willing for big tech companies to understand everything about their browsing habits. And people are really concerned about how much it's revealing about themselves, not because they have anything to hide, but because people value their right to privacy. People value freedom of choice. People value that someone is not taking every single piece of information just to make them spend more money. So Yamur, Gokhan, that's the kind of answer I have to the first two questions of what are cookies and how do they violate our privacy?
Thank you so much. So cookies itself, actually, they are not necessarily dangerous, but how they used from the how the companies use them is actually what causes privacy issues and real harm, as I understood from your explanation. So from the information security point, I know cookies are not harmful, and they can't actually infect computers with viruses or other malware. However, some cyber attacks can hijack cookies and enable access to your browsing sessions. So there are three types of cookies and how they use. One is session management. As you explained, cookies let websites recognize users and recall their individual login information and preferences, such as sport news versus politics. And there is a usage of personalization, like you mentioned, menstrual cycle app, and they personalize they personalize those apps to tell you whatever you need at that specific moment, if you need chocolate, if you need other things. So they do customized advertising, and this is not necessarily harmful itself, but when they do this without taking consent, or if there is any legal basis, we are gonna dive into that topic now. But when they do this, when it comes with the app, and when they make you forced to basically allow those personalization just by using this app. So this can actually invade privacy. And the third one is tracking purposes. Shopping sites uses those cookies to track items users previously viewed, and allowing the sites to suggest other goods they might like, and so they can keep shopping. And this might also invade the privacy. So my next question is, what are the legal obligations related to cookies, and how we can prevent those harms, and what regulations actually say about this?
I'll answer that, and I'll talk about it from my experience and my expertise, which is from a European point of view. But there might be other jurisdictions that have similar views, and there might be some nuances. So just keep in mind that whenever I'm giving these answers, it's based on the GDPR and other European legislation. Just one thing I want to clarify before I answer the question about the legal obligation related to cookies. You mentioned in your excellent summary about session cookies. So what I just want to, if anyone's confused, like, hang on a minute, Jamal, you didn't speak about session cookies. What are you talking about here? I just want to make sure that everyone's got a good understanding. So we said there's 3 categories of cookies, and I gave you those 3 buckets. So we've got the strictly necessary or the functional ones. Then in the second bucket, we have the analytics one, and in the third bucket we have the marketing ones. Now, regardless of which bucket those cookies can fall into 2 types of cookies. So you can have session cookies or you can have persistent cookies. Now, session cookies is they're actually active for the session on which you're visiting that website. Persistent cookies are cookies that are always there. So even if you leave that website and you finish the session of browsing, those text files are dropped on your computer and they're sending information back to the web beacons, which is revealing all of this extra information about you. So that's the key thing that we need to be aware of. In any of these cookies, we can have session cookies and we can have persistent cookies. And when it comes to the legal obligations, which we're going to speak about in a minute, and the principles of data protection, such as data minimization, you have to make sure that you understand whether you have a session cookie or a persistent cookie and how you're actually justifying that. So we'll take a deeper dive into that if time permits. But let's get to the question you want to ask me here. So just to refresh everyone after all that session, persistent cookies, the question Yamur has put to me is, what are the legal obligations related to cookies and what are the regulations or the laws that govern that? And I'm going to talk about this from a European point of view. Now, a lot of people think cookies are to do with the GDPR. Actually, they're not. Cookies has very little to do with the GDPR. It's actually the e-privacy directive, or PECA, the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations. Some people call it the Cookie Directive. Whatever it is the e-privacy directive that actually governs or that tells us what is required from a legal point of view when it comes to the use of cookies. And now, GDPR, sorry, yes, go ahead.
And I have another question, because this question always runs inside my head. For example, I am I work in an enterprise, and we decide to understand the evolving expectations of our consumers, or their motivations to come our website, and we make a deal with an digital marketing firm. They offer us using cookies, and they send us algorithm text files, because these are the cookies, and we make a deal with on the data these cookies will collect. The main part of this is, if they have the chance to change the data types they collect without informing us, because maybe we decide to collect the data which are not personal data, but this firm, without informing us, may change the data types, and this may cause us a problem because we are a data owner. So this puts us under the GDPR, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So regardless of whether we are talking about the e-privacy directive, regardless of whether we're talking about the general data protection regulations, everything always comes back to the European Charter for the Fundamental Human Rights, right? And that's where basically Europeans have been guaranteed their right to privacy. So whichever law or regulation we see has to always be compliant with that. And if it's not, then obviously it's not going to be accepted by the courts in Europe, and it will be struck down. So when it comes to the GDPR only mentions cookies directly once. And in Article 30, it talks about online identifiers and cookie identifiers. And the GDPR says that cookies are an online identifier and is therefore personal data. And that's what brings cookies into the scope of the GDPR. So because it comes into the scope of the GDPR, the data controller now has to comply with all of the principles of the GDPR with the use of cookies. And you spoke, Kohan, there about one of those obligations, which is transparency and fairness. And we'll come into that in a little while. The e-privacy directive, or the cookies directive, the directive that we're talking about, PECA, the Privacy and Electronic Communication Regulations, it gives us more information on what are the lawful obligations in more detail than GDPR. And it tells us that if you are going to be dropping cookies for marketing purposes, then you must obtain consent from the user before you drop those text files on their device. And it talks about a valid consent. And when it talks about a valid consent, we have to take consent from the GDPR standard. And this is where you see a lot of companies have actually got fined, and it's led to a lot of challenges. And more recently, we saw the IAB, the International Advertising Bureau, TCF framework, was actually found to be non-compliant. And we'll talk about that in a moment as well. The e-privacy directive says consent is required before you drop any cookies, and the Planet 49 case is actually the most recent case that gives us a really good interpretation of what is expected. And for all of you lawyers, you know that the law is there, is very vague, and it's actually the courts that give us the interpretation, and it's case law that sets precedent. And the highest court in Europe is the Court of Justice of the European Union. And the most recent case on that is the case of Planet 49. And if any of you want the actual easy peasy summary for that, then just hook us up somewhere, just drop something in the message or ask us on LinkedIn, and we'll share with you the easy peasy summary, and you'll get a really good understanding on that. So the e-privacy directive, Planet 49 is the most recent case on there that sets the precedent and explains what needs to happen. And it says basically, consent is not required if cookies are strictly necessary for the transmission of a communication. A couple of other obligations that we have is inform users that the site uses the cookies, a little bit similar to what you were talking about there, about the obligation to inform. Explain in a clear and comprehensive manner how the cookies work and what you use them for. Show a cookie banner or a cookie notice when the user first visits your website, which is why we get all of those pop-up banners. And it says implement a cookie policy and allow the user to provide that consent or to withhold that consent. And you also must also maintain a record of the consents that you've obtained from those users. So I'm going to go into the Planet 49 case shortly. But before I do that, what I want to do is just summarize what we've discovered in the legal obligations. So when it comes to the legal obligations around cookies, there's the GDPR that we need to look at. And the GDPR talks directly about cookies in Article 30, which brings it into scope. And we've also got the e-privacy directive. And the e-privacy directive gives us a lot more detailed information about what we need to do when it comes to cookies. Now, GDPR also defines or sets out what is valid consent. Right? There are conditions for that consent to be valid, which means that when you're asking for cookies, consent for cookies, that level of consent for it to be valid legally has to meet the conditions of what is acceptable consent under GDPR. And for those of you that have come and trained with us, you'll know that for consent to be valid, it needs to be clear, it needs to be concise, it needs to be a positive affirmative action, which means somebody actually has to do something. Now, the challenge we see with positive affirmative action is a lot of websites still say by continuing to browse this website, you give us your consent. That is not a positive affirmative action, so that is not valid. If you go onto a website and the cookies are pre-ticked, again, that is not a positive affirmative action because we cannot rely on inaction. The other thing with this is consent. For consent to be valid, it has to be as easy to give consent, and it has to be as easy to withdraw that consent as it was to give for the first time. And if you look at some of the fines, such as Google, you'll see this is where they fell down. They had a policy, they had the option to withdraw consent, but consent was not as easy to withdraw as it was to give in the first place, which led them to being attracted to huge fines by the regulators. And if there's time, we'll go into those cases in a little bit more detail.
Thank you. My question is there any other way to put marketing cookies in a website other than taking the consent, getting the consent of data subjects, or if it's the only way to do it?
Okay, excellent question. I'm going to answer your question by talking about what happened in the Planet 49 case. And that should give everyone the latest understanding from the Court of Justice of the European Union, which is the highest court, and they've set the precedent. So the case of Planet 49 basically is an online gambling company, and they offered an online lottery service. To use the service, you as a user had to register and provide your personal information. And that registration form contained two checkboxes. The first one asked you to tick a box allowing Planet 49 to share your data with their commercial partners. And ticking this box was mandatory. Ticking this box was mandatory to participate in the lottery. The second box was pre-ticked and allowed users to opt out from the use of cookies by unticking the boxes. So we know from the GDPR, I've just told you about all of the conditions for consent, and we found, the judges found that the Planet 49 case, that pre-ticked checkboxes are actually invalid because it does not meet the conditions for what is valid consent. And a valid consent is required regardless of the fact if the cookies contain personal data or not. So even if those cookies are anonymized, that doesn't mean that you suddenly are free from complying with your legal obligations under the PECA or under the GDPR. So even if those cookies are anonymized, valid consent is still required. Website operators also have to inform users about the duration of the cookie lifespan and whether third parties will have access to these technologies. So when we talk about cookie lifespan, a little while ago, I spoke about consistent cookies and persistent cookies. So they're saying let people know what kind of cookies you have and how long you're going to be storing that information for. And it also says when it comes to cookies and getting consent, you shouldn't bundle the different purposes under the same request for consent. So sometimes you'll go to a website and say, hey, do you want to accept cookies? Click here to say you want to accept all cookies. That is bundled consent ask. So you can't do that. You have to make sure that people have the individual options to choose what it is that they choose to consent to or not consent to. Now, the Planet 49 case actually went further than that. And remember those three buckets I spoke about at the beginning of this session? We have the strictly necessary cookies, the analytics cookies, and the actual third-party marketing cookies. So you need a valid lawful basis for each type of cookie. So for the strictly necessary cookies for the site to function, the court ruled that for those particular types of cookies, you can actually have them drop automatically because without them, the website won't actually work. So they're strictly necessary. So those cookies, you don't actually have to ask for consent. You don't need to do anything. You can just drop them automatically, but just make sure that you follow the principles of data protection, which means you have to inform people the fact that you are using these cookies and just explain to them what they actually do and all of the other transparency information. The second bucket we spoke about was the analytics cookies. And what the court said here is, you know what, you can actually rely on legitimate interests to drop those cookies, but you must give them the opportunity to opt out. And for those of you that have come and we've done training on legitimate interest, you know that whenever you are relying on legitimate interest, you have to give the individual the right to object to the processing. How do you give the individual the right to object to the processing? Make sure there is an opt-out. So for the second bucket of the analytics cookies, as long as you give them an opportunity to opt out, you can actually rely on legitimate interest to drop those cookies automatically. And that leaves us with the final bucket. The final bucket, this is the targeting, the marketing cookies. To use those cookies, the only lawful basis you can rely on is consent. And again, for that consent to be valid, you have to make sure that it meets all of the conditions of valid consent as per the GDPR. And the French authority, the CNIL, actually fined Google 150 million euros. And also they fined Facebook 60 million euros because that consent process was found not to be valid. So if the process to obtain consent for dropping cookies involves clicking on a button, then the process to reject those cookies should also be the same. In the case of Google, they had an I agree button to accept all the cookies, but there was no equal button to reject all the cookies. To reject the cookies, the customer had to click on customize and then reject each cookie separately. So remember, for consent to be valid, it has to be as easy to withdraw that consent as it was to give. So you can click one button to accept everything. There should also be one button to reject everything. And because Google didn't have that, they was fined the 150 million euros. And this was found not to be in line with the principles of data protection, and it wasn't upholding the freedom of consent for the users, and therefore it kind of fell down.
Thank you. So as I understood, there are 3 types of cookies. One is strictly necessary, the other one is analytics, and the other one is advertising and marketing cookies. And any company, if it's needed, if it's strictly necessary cookies to website to actually work, they can drop down those cookies without getting any consent or relying on any legitimate interest or any other lawful basis, because it is lawful basis itself. And if it's analytic cookies, you need to give the option to opt out, and this opt out needs to be easily reachable, and people can actually easily reach and see and opt out easily, because sometimes you need to scroll down a little bit to actually reach or click in other segments. So it should be clearly seen. And if it's marketing cookies, under the PECA and under the PECA, which is Privacy Directive of UK, you need to get consent, and consent is the only lawful ground to use cookies for marketing reasons. And in that scenario, you need to give people right to opt in, not opt out. They should be able to select if they want their data to be used in that way. And even in that scenario, there was a case, Google and Facebook being fined, not that because they weren't complying, they weren't complying, but not just because they didn't provide the opt-out, opt-in choice, but they didn't provide it as easy as to give consent. And this consent needs to be clear. And what was the other necessities of the consent? Yeah.
So it was found that this consent process wasn't valid because it didn't meet all of the requirements under the GDPR of what is valid consent.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't specifically in this situation, it wasn't as easy to withdraw as it was to give in the first place. So it didn't meet that specific condition.
Mm-hmm. So in GDPR, there are basic principles, and this opt-in and opt-out is actually related with one of them, which is data minimization. So can you explain a little bit about the data minimization and why it is important to follow the principles to, because GDPR may sometimes not cover everything, and courts are giving opinions, we have guidelines and everything. So why those principles are important, and what is actually data minimization related with the cookies?
Okay, sure. So just to clarify, with the actual opt-in, opt-out, that would fall under the first principle of lawfulness, because that's where we're saying we're relying on some kind of lawful basis. So if we're opting out, then it means we're relying on legitimate interest. And if we're asking for consent, then obviously it's consent. And so that's covered under the first principle. And of course, you have transparency there as well, which is making sure people actually understand what it is they're actually opting out of, or what it is they're actually opting into, and what it is they're consenting to. The principle of data minimization, that is super relevant. So do you remember earlier on we spoke about persistent cookies and session cookies? So data minimization basically says you should only collect the minimum amount of data that is necessary to fulfill a specific purpose. So let's say, Yamor, I'm selling chocolate. I'm selling chocolate online. If you come to my website, I only need information about your session to be able to sell you the chocolate and to process it and order it, making sure your card is verified and you are who you say you are, etc. There's no need for me to drop a persistent cookie on your device to find out what you're doing for the next 10 years, right? I don't need to understand your web activities for the next 10 years for you to be able to come to my website and have a pleasant user experience to buy chocolates and receive those chocolates. The problem is, though, we are seeing websites where you go and visit them and they're dropping cookies that last 999 years when you visit that website. And what we're saying is that is too much information and you're not meeting the data minimization principle. The data that you collect should be limited to what is necessary for you to fulfill that purpose. There is no requirement for you to drop persistent cookies on people's devices for a number of things. In fact, there is no requirement for you to collect additional information about somebody. If you've come to my website, I don't need to, and you've made a purchase, why do I need to know what you're doing tomorrow and which websites you're visiting the next day? Right? So this is all about data minimization, is only collecting the information that is relevant for you to be able to fulfill the purpose, not collecting stuff because it's nice to have, not collecting stuff because, you know what, it might be useful one day and maybe we can actually sell it to a data broker who can then target you for something else. You like chocolate, so that means you like sugary stuff. Maybe we can offer you a high sugary drink or something like that, right? So this is the stuff that they do, is they look at preferences, they look to try and build a profile and then try and use that information and sell it to other people for a profit to target you so they can make more money, right? So it's actually looking at the fact that saying, listen, you don't need to violate people's privacy like that. You don't need to violate their freedom over their choices, over what it is they're doing. What you should do is just limit your cookies to what is strictly necessary for the purpose for which you're placing those cookies. Now, if you are actually placing those cookies for marketing purposes, then make sure this person knows that by accepting this marketing cookie, you plan to collect information from them over the next 10 years. Now, if you went to a website and you saw the fact that they're dropping marketing cookies, you might be like, yeah, you know what, I don't mind you telling me about stuff I like. Let's say, for example, if I particularly like shopping, where do you like shopping?
Technological items.
Let's say, yeah, so let's say you like technological items and maybe you went to a technological retailer here. Let's say you went to Dixon's or Curry's or whatever the company is. Let's say you went to PC World. You might not mind PC World showing you adverts, but do you want PC World to drop a cookie to share all of the information about everything that you're doing for the next 10 years?
No. I mean, I sometimes want personalized ads. For example, Instagram shows me really relevant ads, and I find myself, I never click any ads on Google or any other social media platform and buy something directly clicking that's link. But with Instagram, they show me so relevant ads and actually concerts or theaters that I'm interested in and I might want to go, and it serves me well. So I feel personalized adverts are not necessarily bad, but they need to tell me and they need to get consent from me. Other way, I'm not okay for them to keep my data or track me for 10 years or how many years they would like.
Yeah, so that's correct. So even if you wanted to get personalized adverts on Instagram, you might actually say, yes, you know, I accept these cookies. They can see the kind of things I'm looking at, the kind of things I'm liking, and they can send me stuff that's going to be relevant to me. But maybe I only want them to do that while I'm using Instagram. Or maybe I only want them to do that for the next 6 months or for next year. So that's basically what we're talking about, is minimizing the information that's been collected to what is necessary for the purpose you're trying to achieve. And going back to the first principle, remember, there's fairness in that. Right? What is necessary and what is proportionate? 999 years isn't something that's proportionate. 10 years might not be something that's proportionate. In some scenarios, it may be, but in most scenarios, it won't be. So you have to make a judgment call based on what it is that you're trying to achieve, based on what you think is fair to the user in a transparent way, and fulfill all of the legal obligations that you have, especially the 7 principles.
Mm-hmm. If it's a legal requirement, if you may need to give the information to, if there is an open case and law authorities, you may be obliged to keep the data for a longer period of times, but you need to know the retention periods, and you need to decide which data are you going to collect and which lawful basis are you going to depend on. I think this is why cookie policies are really important for the companies. So my next question is, what is actually cookie policy and why they are important, why it's important to implement it to our companies, and what should those cookie policies involve? What should be in there?
Yeah, really a great question. And the first thing I want to do is clear up a misconception about the word policy and notice. And we see this all the time. We might even have an employer or a client that actually uses this. When you go onto a website and it has privacy policy or cookies policy, that term is actually incorrect. A policy is an internal document. It tells companies how they should be doing stuff internally. What they really mean is a cookies notice. A notice gives you certain information. So what is a cookie policy? A cookie policy is an internal document that should govern how cookies are used in the organization. But I don't believe that's what the question is. The question should be, or the question really is, what is a cookies notice and why is it important? Now, cookies notices are important because it helps us to be compliant with the data protection laws and regulations, and it also helps us to be fair. So let's have a look at the basic principles that we've been speaking about. We know that the first principle of the GDPR is to make sure that we are transparent and that we are fair and there is a lawful basis. So a cookies notice helps you to be transparent. A cookies notice helps you to be fair by explaining to the customer the choices they're about to make, and it helps you to demonstrate the lawfulness because it will show which lawful basis you are using for what cookies. So a cookies notice is a list of all the cookies that are being used by a specific website with detailed information about each cookie that's made available to the actual user, and it provides them with valuable information and insights about how their personal data is going to be processed when they visit this specific website. So it helps the business. It's important to the business because it helps them to demonstrate compliance with the transparency principle. And for a cookie notice to be compliant, there's a couple of key ingredients that should be included within that. And there's 7 key things which I like to see and you should all include in your cookies notice. So the first one is you should indicate the type of cookie that's installed. That means whether it's a first-party cookie or whether it's a third-party cookie. A first-party cookie is something that is actually put there by the website developer or the website owner, and they're getting this information. A third-party cookie is someone else's cookie placed on your website. So you have to indicate what type of cookie is it. Is it a third-party cookie or a first-party cookie? So that's key ingredient number 1. Key ingredient number 2 is you have to indicate all third parties that install, manage, or access cookies via your website or your app with a link to their respective notices and any opt-out forms where they're available. So that's being transparent about who are these third parties. It's all very well you're telling me this is a first party and a third party cookie, but who is the person that this information is going to? I'd like to know who that is. So you have to give that information. The third thing is the categories of the data that's processed by the cookies. So what information is this cookie actually collecting? Number 4 is where in the world is the end user data being sent to, and what are third parties is it being shared with? So for example, Google Analytics in the US or in another part of the world. Number 5 is there should be a description in detail of the purposes for which these cookies are being used. Number 6, there should be information about how the end user can choose whether to allow to process their data or not, and how they can later check or change their consent. And the last thing is it should be available in all languages in which the service is actually provided. So if you have a website that is being made available to French users, then you should have a notice that is actually being translated to French as well.
Thank you.
The key things I always look for when I'm actually looking at a cookies notice is, okay, what are the different cookies? What are they called? What are the names? Are they persistent cookies? Are they session cookies? How long are they actually going to be deployed for? And then who is this information going to be shared with, or who is it going to? And what is the purpose of this? What are they actually trying to achieve by collecting all this information about me through my device?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's about identifying which cookies are going to be used. Are they first-party cookies, third-party cookies, where they are going to start, and what are their categories. So all these are legal requirements, and this is actually what we called compliance. So being compliant not just means to put opt-in, opt-out choices, but it is also knowing the reasoning behind in every action you do to protect people's privacy. So I think companies need to consider with two different eyes. One is from data subjects' eyes, and the other one is companies' eyes. So what would I expect if I was the one whose data being processed? So even they don't know many things about cookies or how the consent should be taken, if they think about this, I think that will give them opportunity to research more and learn more. And I understand, I see like cookie notice and policy is actually different, but I want to change my question by asking this. So how can a company create cookie collection policy? So policy is internal document and the notice is external document. Notice is what we put on our website and the policy is internal. So what is it going to be, what should it be in that internal document? And then I will go through the expectations and what is changing in the landscape of cookies. But this will be my last question related to regulations.
All right, no worries. So before I answer this last question on what should be inside a policy and not a notice, let's just check in with all of the lovely Isaka Istanbul audience and see how everyone is doing. So guys, how much are you enjoying this webinar so far? Give us a number between 1 and 10, 1 being, I hate this, I want to go to sleep right now, get away from me, and 10 being, I'm absolutely loving it. So between 1 and 10, let's see some numbers of where you guys are. And that should give me the inspiration I need to give you a knockout last 15 minutes and beyond. All right, fantastic. We've seen a number of, you guys are generous. I love you guys so much. And I haven't bribed you guys, by the way, if anyone's wondering. This is good, lots of number 10s. Okay, fantastic. So let's come back to Yamur's question. So Yamur said, Jamal, thank you for telling us the difference between a notice and a policy. Now that you've discovered there is two different things and they're not one and the same, tell us about the policy. What do we need to know when it comes to a policy? So this policy is going to be like any other policies that you have when it comes to how you manage things internally as an organization. And most of you might actually have a data protection policy. And a cookies policy is not too different from a data protection policy. The data protection policy talks about how you will handle personal information within the business. A cookies policy is also going to share and put you the company's position on how cookies are going to be used within the business. So one of the things you might say is, a policy always starts off with describing the kind of purpose of this cookie. So we'll talk about the reason we have this cookie is probably to be compliant with European data protection laws or with the data protection laws, and also to make sure that we are respecting the privacy of our users. That's the reason we have this. And if you breach this policy, then it could mean that we actually have reputational damage, we lose trust and confidence, we lose customers. We could also land ourselves with a rather hefty fine. And in some serious cases, it might even threaten the existence of the business. So it's important people understand what is the consequences of breaching the policy. So you've got the purpose of the policy. The next thing I would put inside the policy is, what is the scope of this policy? Does this include our external websites? Does this include our apps? Does it include our internal, how do you call it? I've lost the, what is the name you have for your internal network at work?
Intranet?
Intranet, yeah. Does this apply to our intranet? What is the scope of where this actually applies? So now everybody knows when this applies and when it doesn't apply. So once we've got those three things, then we need to say, okay, what are the rules that we're going to give ourselves when it comes to following these things? So what you actually look to do is a little bit like when you have your data protection policies to say, we will respect the 7 principles of data protection when we handle personal information. You'd actually say the same thing. We will respect the principles of data protection when we handle this. We will also make sure that we're compliant with the PECR, which means that whenever we use analytics cookies, we're always going to give them the opportunity to opt out. Whenever we're asking for consent, we're going to make sure that the consent is as easy to withdraw as it was to give in the first place. Whenever you're using cookies, we're going to make sure that in the cookies notice, we explain what type of cookie it is. We're going to make sure we follow the principle of data minimization by only having these cookies last as long as we really need them to, etc., etc. So you're going to go through everything that's required from a legal point of view, and you're going to embed that in your cookies policy, because now anyone that comes to your organization that wants to open a website, that wants to add more cookies, they can go through this policy and they know exactly what the position is of the organization when it comes to policies, which means that you can actually protect your personal reputation, and it can actually help you to cultivate that trust, inspire that confidence, and ultimately have a business that's empowered to adopt honest privacy practices when it comes to using those cookies. If you need help with any of those things, then of course we can always help you or your businesses at KZN Privacy Experts. It's one of the things that we're really good at. And this is probably my 6th webinar on cookies in the last 6 months. So you can see how much of an important topic this is, and businesses are struggling to get it right. And the reason they're struggling is because of this IAB TCF framework that was found not to be compliant. Now, what the IAB was doing was taking the absolute biscuit, right? I'm not going to do what Max Schrems does and start swearing in his presentations, but they was really having a laugh. So when it comes to data protection, right, there's 2 spectrums. So on one side, you say, you know what, we're giving absolute choice and freedom to the data subject. This is where we ask for consent. So we say, we're not going to do anything with your personal information unless you tell us it's okay to do so. On the other side, you have a legal obligation, which is, we don't care what you say, we're going to do this anyway. And when you look at the 6 lawful bases we have according to the GDPR, you can see that consent is here. You can see that legal obligation is here. And then next to that, you have kind of contract, which means we're going to do it anyway. And in the middle, a little bit on this side, more than it is on this side, you have legitimate interest, which means that, look, we're not going to ask for your permission to do this. We're going to do it anyway. But if you don't like it, we'll stop. That's basically what we do when we ask for legitimate interest. We say, look, we're going to do this thing anyway without asking you, but if you don't like it, we'll stop. It just falls short of consent. Consent says we're not going to do anything unless you ask us to. So what this IAB TCF framework had in place was, they said, hey, we don't know what lawful basis we're going to rely on. We're going to rely on the one that means we can make the most money. So we're going to ask you for consent. And if you don't give us consent, we're going to go and do it anyway. And how much integrity or how disingenuous do you think that sounds to you? Yamur, let me ask you a question. Can I have £20?
Yes.
Okay. Can I have £1,000?
Like, are you asking from me?
Yeah, can I have £1,000 from you?
Yes. If you are
okay, stop being so generous and say no. Okay.
If
Now
it's
let's
so long.
okay, now Yamur is too generous, right, guys? She's got the heart of gold. Okay, so I'm saying, Yamur, give me consent to take £1,000 from you. She's saying no. Can I just say, well, I'm going to take it anyway?
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly what these guys were doing with this consent for cookies. Is they were saying, give us your consent. Nah, we're going to take it on legitimate interest anyway. Mm-hmm. And if you want to find a way of opting out of that, they made it so complicated that you was like, you know what? Either I'm going to accept all the cookies or I'm not going to use this website anyway. And that's why it was found to be in violation of the principles which we live by when it comes to processing personal information, and therefore the IAB Europe TC Transparency and Consent Framework is not actually valid. And any company that was using that is now struggling and thinking, oh my days, what are we going to do about it? And to make things even worse, our friend in Austria, Max Schrems, who I'm sure you're all very acquainted with, he got fed up of these cookies, malarkey, and all of this stuff. And he actually went and found 101 companies from all of the European states. And he looked at the companies that have the most traffic, and he sent 101 complaints to all of the individual regulators about how all of these companies are using cookies. And this is why we're seeing these Google Analytics cases coming to the forefront and all of these other interesting ones. So if you work for a large company, you might want to go and have a look at your cookies notice and your cookies policy and make sure you get that right before the regulator comes knocking, thanks to your friends, Max Schrems.
Yes, so my last question is, how do you see this landscape is developing over the next few years? And do you foresee anything specifically on cookies? And then we can jump into questions of our audience.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really fascinating question. We can see that technology is evolving at an incredible rate, which basically means the way cookies can be used, the innovation, the amount of information that we can collect with that can be astonishing, but at the same time, that could be alarming because who knows what could be revealed about individuals and how that may be used or abused against them, right? And we've seen algorithms based on machine learning algorithms and all of this information on profiling. A lot of it is biased, and it's biased not because of any malicious intent, but because the kind of people that program these things all are very similar. Middle class, Caucasian males, Europeans, right? Which means that there is inherent bias, and anyone that deviates from that, it could actually be penalized and punished. And so one of the things that's really key here is to make sure that whatever happens moving forward, we find a way of either maintaining some kind of positive discrimination or overcoming that bias. I don't think we're going to overcome that bias anytime soon. So I think what companies need to do is put in place positive discrimination practices and policies to compensate for the inherent bias that's going to be there with all of the cookies and their profiling and marketing activities. The other thing I see a lot of people switching to are browsers that protect their privacy. And the thing is, we have browsers like DuckDuckGo, like search engines that promise privacy, but we're seeing reports revealing that these guys are actually worse because they're telling you they're not collecting information, but they're selling it to Microsoft under a backdoor agreement anyway. So how much integrity and confidence can we have in these companies that are coming and promising that they're keeping this information secure when all along they're just using it to violate us? So there'll be lots of interesting cases that we see coming up, I guess. I think we're probably going to see, I predicted this about the Ring doorbell cameras, right? But I predict we might see some class actions against some of these companies against the use of cookies. And even if you just got 50 euros, from the risk management point of view of the data controller, if you've got 1 million customers, or if you had 1 million users and it's 50 euros each, what does that translate to?
Bankruptcy.
A lot of money, right? Exactly. So I predict there's going to be lots of movement in this space. I think cookies, consent banners are going to become more and more popular. I think we might actually see a few more companies coming into this space as well. So if you guys are looking to invest, keep an eye out for those guys. But I think the most important thing that's going to happen here is people are actually going to say, you know what, I'm interested in what you're actually doing with these cookies. And I'd prefer to use a browser, or I'd prefer a website that doesn't actually collect all of this stuff about me and sell it at my loss or at my expense. And we're going to see consumers making positive choices.
Thank you. On my side, cookies are actually a really deep topic and super related with privacy and the personal freedom rights of people. And there are many aspects to think about. Not only, it's not just about putting one cookie notice or cookie policy, but you actually need to think. So we can get questions from our audience because we are moving towards to the end. Actually, we should, it should be, our event should be over now, but I think we might still have time for a couple of questions. So Hayrican, what do you think?
I think if there is any other question from our audience, we can ask. I also shared my question. Let me check it. Where was it?
Thank you so much, Jamal. It was really informative session. And personally, I learned a lot. And now I have a clear framework about cookies and how they should be used and what companies need to consider while they're implementing any cookie solution.
Thank you. Well, it's my absolute pleasure to come and share some knowledge. I mean, this is something that inspires me. And if I've managed to give any more clarity or confidence to any of you on this free webinar today, then that's fantastic. Just imagine how much more value you get when you come and actually train with us and you pay money towards it. One thing I do ask you is if you got any value from this webinar whatsoever, and you want to build your personal brand in this space, take your takeaways, and this is what we do with the people who come from my accelerator program, pay me a lot of money. We say, take those takeaways and write a LinkedIn post about it and tag me, right? I have around 16,000 followers. I have a lot of recruiters who are actually my personal friends. If you want visibility, if you want to build your personal brand in this space, go ahead, write off that platform that I already have, tag me, share your key takeaways. I promise you I will come and comment on it and help you to have that visibility too. All I ask you to do is make sure that you come and leave some kind of review on our YouTube channel or our podcast if you find it useful.
Definitely. Please take Aysaka and Jamal and mention your takeaways and share it on social media platforms. This is how we can actually support the privacy, how we can support privacy environment and build a good foundation around data protection and privacy. So yes, Hayrijan, please ask your question.
Okay, yeah. Actually, I asked the motivation of attackers to steal cookies, but Jamal has already answered that question, I guess. I know. If there is no question, we can end the session. I have no any other question. Guys, this is a great opportunity to ask your question directly to the king of data protection.
I see Ashutosh has
We
his
have
hand
a
up.
question. Yes, we have a question from Ashutosh.
Ashutosh, yeah.
Yes.
Ashutosh, go for
I
it.
suppose.
Yeah. Ashutosh, you can unmute yourself.
Can he admit himself or is it restricted?
Yes.
That's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes. Thank you so much. So my question is, Jamal, regarding direct marketing. You said that they have to provide an option of opt-in. That if I want this direct marketing to be marketed at me, I need to opt in that section. But what if I'm a company that makes a lot of money out of marketing and it becomes a real task for me and I'm losing on a lot of revenue because I have to ask people to opt in, which I know for sure that people are not going to do it, not because they want to, don't want to, but because it's a task when I visit a website to opt into more things. So how is it practically possible that I provide this option when I know that I'm going to lose on huge revenue? That is what I would like to know.
But you need to put people's fundamental rights above your revenue is the simple answer. But look,
Okay.
if you do your branding right, if you do your marketing right, and if you are a company that actually shows them we value your privacy and we will actually respect that, and we're only going to collect this minimum amount of information for these specific purposes, and you cultivate that trust and inspire that confidence, people will be more happy to say, hey, go for it.
Wolfgang, I'm so sorry, Ashutosh, please continue.
No, thank you, I'm done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. It's not actually a question, it's an addition to what Jamal said, which always should be the first way how to handle the rights of your customers. But also there might be a local law that allows you, at least in Germany we have this, if you have an existing relationship with a customer and, for example, you sold him a car and you want to offer him some tires for the winter season, then under strict restrictions, you're allowed to inform him about this without getting consent for her before. Sorry, switch to German. So this is a very small area and might be different from country to country. At least in Germany, this works. It's the Gesetz gegen unlauteren Wettbewerb, unfair competition law, or law against unfair competition. Okay.
Thank you for sharing, Wolfgang.
Yeah, thanks.
Is there anyone who wants to ask another question? So Jamal, thank you for being with us. And
Hi,
also,
Richard.
yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but
Okay.
Jamal wants to share our trailer, which is our podcast trailer
Of
we've
course.
been working on lately. So before finishing, if we could show it to the audience, and
Okay.
if you like to subscribe, you can. It is a great resource for any aspiring privacy professionals. And
Yeah, of course.
Jamal, if you could show it.
Sure.
Could you? I was looking for it, but I couldn't.
Let me see if it's possible to do that sharing my screen. Give me 1 second.
Okay, amazing. So be sure you catch all of the links we provide.
Okay, so
Right.
Sharon will be kind enough to drop the link for you to actually subscribe to this. And here's the trailer. I hope the sound comes through.
Sound is not coming right now.
Yeah. During sharing, you need to also share your voice. There's a
Share
link.
my.
Voice. I mean the sound of your computer.
So
Oh,
how
right,
we
okay.
would do this?
I've actually lost the. Oh, there we go. There's controls. Let's have a look.
On the bottom left, there should be a thick box with the
Yeah.
share
Get it,
your
get
sound.
it. All right. Let me know if this works.
Are you ready to turbocharge your passion? Discover how the world's leading privacy pros made it to the top.
Immerse yourself in networking and really be part of that passionate drive for, new developments in privacy.
It's really about soft skills and listening to people.
I really got into it. I thought it was great.
Hey, this is a good business practice because literally people care.
We're not telling them what to do, we're telling them how we will do it together.
The impact of the GDPR was much larger than what I think everyone expected.
Hosted by
Jamal Ahmed.
Jamal Ahmed is a fellow of information privacy,
founder of Kasian Privacy Expert.
Should we stop using WhatsApp? Can they see my message? What's happening?
It's not a stupid question.
That's exact.
We're never going to end this conversation otherwise.
Welcome to the Privacy Pros Academy podcast.
Yeah, we need more people. If you're listening to this and you're interested in privacy, you need to reach out to Jamal.
With that being said, thank you so much, Jamal. It was a great pleasure to have you among us today in İSAKA, Istanbul chapter. And we are really glad to share this information out loud through you.
Thank you for hosting me, and thank you for having me. And thank you to everyone who gave up their evening to come and join us as well. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for everything. Have a good night.